recorded because otherwise, perfect. Okay, so yes, this presentation will be recorded so that if someone didn't have the chance to drop by because they are on the ward or anything like that, they will be able to find the video on the McPig page. Donc, la façon dont on va procéder, c'est que chaque présentateur a une slide d'un petit PowerPoint, environ 10 minutes chaque. Et si on a du temps à la fin, il y aura peut-être une période de questions. But for that, I will ask the presenters to really be conscientious of the time. Don't go over 10 minutes, please. And that's pretty much it. Donc, encore une fois, merci à vous tous d'être venus et merci particulièrement à nos présentateurs. C'est vraiment apprécié. Donc, je vais commencer en partageant mon écran. Voilà, there you go. OK. Donc, on va aller tout de suite à la première présentation. Jokes on us, parce qu'en fait, Daria ne pouvait pas être là ce soir, mais elle a vraiment gracieusement accepté de produire une slide. Donc, si on ne va pas prendre, on ne va pas s'attarder à cette slide-là, mais si vous voulez revisiter le PowerPoint qu'on va partager, vous pouvez lire plus en détail cette slide-là. Donc, sans plus attendre, on va passer à la première présentation. Mehdi.
Hi, everyone. This is a bit surprising because I honestly thought that Daria was going to go first. And I was like, hey, like, I don't know, because I find my stories a little bit random in comparison to other people's. But anyways, so my name is Maddie. So a little bit about my background. I did my bachelor's in biomedical sciences at the University of Ottawa, what feels like a very long time ago. And then after finishing my bachelor's degree, I started a master's in education, but quickly moved over to working because that was a more financially kind of like responsible thing to do in some ways. Or I don't know, like I got a job at Health Canada and I started working there. I worked for 2 years as a senior regulatory affairs officer in the regulation of pharmaceuticals. And then I got accepted to medical school and moved to Montreal to go to McGill. So my story is not like a very like cookie. It's not like I don't know, like my background is not exactly like super relevant to psychiatry or medicine in particular. But I did do a lot of research throughout my undergrad, and I'll get to kind of how it plays into my story in medical school as well. So I wasn't really into psychiatry. Like I didn't know I wanted to do psychiatry up until I would say around Med 3. But throughout medical school, I tried my best to just be part of as many extracurriculars as I could. So I remember in like first year, I was part of like every plausible club I could maybe see myself sort of believing in the vision of. And then in second year, I kind of like let go of most of them. But I stuck around with the ones I really cared about. So in particular, that was the whole person care interest group, which is like a really phenomenal interest group, and the rare disease, the interest group for rare diseases, which is a big deal for me as well. Other things that I did on my spare time was I was a volunteer barista at this cafe in Le Plateau. It doesn't exist anymore. It closed in the context of the pandemic, but it was called Café Floraison, and it was a cool kind of like spiritual cafe. And I used to volunteer there sometimes after class. I also became a dad in second year, so that just took up all my time, and that's part of the reason why I stopped doing interest groups. But so that's one thing. And I think this is going to be reverberated in the other presentations, and I am sort of conscious of the time, but like illustrating your hobbies and interests and developing cool hobbies and interests that like are meaningful to you is something that's really important, and something I found was celebrated in the context of applying to psychiatry. So things that I included that I really like were the fact that I really like languages. I've been learning kind of different languages since I was in my undergrad. I took a lot of German classes and learned like beginner German. I took advanced Arabic classes, even though I'm not an Arab, I just have an Arabic name, but I became fluent in Arabic. And then I was very grateful and lucky to move to Montreal, which is a francophone city, and kind of like ameliorate my French to, I think, an okay level. Other things is like I'm a really big antique enthusiast, and I really love poetry. I'm not going to go into like my like sort of obsession, but anyways, so like things like that, and just kind of highlighting things, I find that they're really celebrated in psychiatry. And I would say that like most of my free time I spent doing research, and I'm a low-key, high-key kind of like nerd. I come to only understand that when I'm with my classmates, and I'm like, wow, you guys have like nice, wholesome lives. But I just did, I spent a lot of my time in research. I really wanted to do dermatology actually in the beginning of medical school. And so most of my papers are in derm or immunology. But at the near the end, when I started kind of like getting interested in psychiatry, I got a chance to publish in sort of like learning disabilities, which is sort of psychiatrically related. And now I have a paper that's hopefully is going to be published soon, which is in actually I guess like social isolation in older populations in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry, I say I agree with Samuel because my slide was at some point behind his slide, but it will make sense at some point. Quickly, just moving along. So electives, I really was like interested in a lot of different things, but I think the big thing that changed for me is it was in Med 3 when I did my child psych rotation at the Jewish General Hospital, which is a phenomenal elective to do. And if you get a chance to do it, you really should. And that's what kind of like piqued my interest in psychiatry, and then the love story just kind of went on from there, like letters after letters. But and so yeah, so in Med 4 I did kind of like every Royal College kind of like acknowledged subspecialties. So Jerry for 2 weeks, geriatrics, Jerry for 2 weeks. I also did some therapy for 4 weeks, and then I actually decided to finish my elective with 4 weeks of research in psychiatry. And that's what sort of produced the last couple like research hurrahs of my time at McGill. So I ended up applying to just psychiatry. I applied to almost every program. Anyways, because of like the French thing, and I didn't really have a certificate to prove that I was fluent in French or anything close to that, I ended up only applying to the English schools. So I applied to McGill and then most of the rest of Canada. I got invited to 12 out of the 14 programs I applied for, and I ranked all of them. I was kind of down to go to most of them, I would say. I'm gonna just move on to the tips because I don't want this to go too long, but I asked for reference letters from five different people, and they all ended up writing one. Like the last guy, like the fifth one kind of wrote it and submitted it the day beforehand. And this is a piece of advice that I'd really give to everyone: is ask for more than 3 reference letters, because you never know. You might be banking on all 3 of those people submitting their letters, and maybe those are the 3 that you would like to submit, but you don't know. Like sometimes things happen and people don't end up actually writing the letters. So I would actually recommend that you have a couple of extra letters just in case, even though you can only use 3. The second thing I would say is like have a friend that you can kind of like take this like CaRMS ride with. It's a very hectic sort of process, and if you have a friend or 2 friends who are kind of like also interested in applying to a similar specialty or the same specialty as you, I really recommend that. It's actually very helpful. So I ended up matching to McMaster's University at the Waterloo Regional Campus. And this was actually kind of one of my top choices. Contextually, I kind of was weighing my options of like staying at McGill or like moving to Ontario or like Ottawa, close to where I grew up. And McMaster's ended up kind of coming near the top of my list because my in-laws and kind of like my extended family, a lot of them kind of live in that region. So it was partially like a family kind of thing, and also just like acknowledgement of like a really strong program. And I think that's something I just wanted to like highlight as I quickly rush into my tip section, is that when you do make kind of your choice of where you want to rank things, it's a strong program is a strong program, but you're kind of there for 5 years. So like there's other things that come into play that are very, very important. And it's important to kind of just have that universal worldview. So going to my tips, so I would really recommend doing as many electives as you can and like different things that you find interesting to find the thing that really speaks to you and the people that you feel like you kind of can connect with. And I would say that I think this is like the two next points I would say are like inevitable, like huge, just I don't know, like life pearls I've gained in my like 30 almost years of life, is that seeking out mentors is like really like important is an understatement to how like how important it is in life. Like you really need mentors. Like I feel like it, like before I knew this thing about mentors, I was like pseudo walking through life blindly. Like even if I wasn't aware of it, I don't know, I'm not like, anyways, I'm not going to go into too many details, but I think like seeking out mentors is really important, because people who have kind of walked the path and have treaded ahead of you and are able to kind of give you that insight, especially when you're trying to make like important decisions. It's important, I think, to have people like that in your life who can inform things for you. So like I actually really think that's a phenomenal thing to have in different spheres of your life, like in academics, in your like social life. If you're into like spirituality or like kind of like bigger world views, people like that, like people inspire you and make you want to grow. McGill, we're super lucky. We're such a strong research university. So if you don't like research, that's all good. But if you have an inclining towards research, that becomes a really good door to finding good mentors. And I would really recommend that you all take advantage of being at McGill and do some research if you like it. And the last point I already kind of spoke about, if you get a chance to do electives at different sites in McGill's sort of like network, or if you guys are lucky and get a chance to do electives elsewhere as well, I think it's a really good idea to take advantages of that and just see how this specialty is practiced in such different ways in such different places. So that's my little spiel. And if you have any questions, I might have to leave earlier than the presentation ends. You can definitely just shoot me an email. That's my email there at the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and perfect timing. Okay, so let's go straight to the next slide. Sandrine.
Allô! OK, ben dans le fond, moi, j'ai match à l'UDM. J'ai fait MTP, donc j'ai pas un très grand background. Puis quand j'ai commencé, je pensais surtout vouloir aller en pédiatrie. Donc, j'ai beaucoup de mes implications qui sont reliées à la pédiatrie dans le club d'intérêt en pédiatrie depuis la première année. J'ai été bénévole dans des organismes aussi avec des enfants. Puis j'avais parti un comité aussi relié à ça. Mais j'avais aussi un intérêt pour la santé mentale de la première année là, que j'ai comme réalisé après qu'il y avait quand même un lien avec la psychiatrie au final. Donc, j'étais dans le club de Student Wellness. Sorry, I went for French, but if you have a question in English or anything, that works too. Donc, j'étais dans le Student Wellness depuis la première année. J'avais fait osmose avec IFMSA aussi, puis dans le groupe de prévention pour le site de Sentinelle. Donc, j'avais quand même des intérêts variés. Là. Puis c'est en 4e année que là, j'ai fait le club d'intérêt en psychiatrie aussi, que j'avais découvert mon intérêt pour la psy. Puis quelque chose que je conseille aussi, si jamais vous avez comme le temps de prendre un cours en ligne, là, moi pendant la COVID, j'avais comme du temps extra, là, donc j'avais pris comme des petits cours en ligne sur des sujets qui m'intéressaient, puis c'est quelque chose que j'ai pu, que j'avais des certifications à la fin aussi pour ça, puis c'était juste comme 1 heure par semaine ou des choses comme ça, puis c'est quelque chose qui est revenu aussi un peu dans mes entrevues, fait que c'était comme un bon plus pour mon CV, puis c'était un vrai intérêt aussi. Puis sinon, ben, comme Adi a dit, j'ai continué mes intérêts personnels. Je danse depuis super longtemps. J'ai continué à faire ça à travers la médecine, puis du plein air aussi. Puis ça, c'est aussi des choses qui sont revenues dans les entrevues. En termes de recherche, j'avais rien fait en psychiatrie. J'en avais fait en pédiatrie. J'avais commencé en pré-med. Puis j'ai donc 2 publications, là, plus en pédiatrie, en pulmonologie, puis en endocrinologie. J'avais fait un programme de recherche à l'Université de Montréal de 1 an qui était comme un peu l'initiation à la recherche. Là, puis c'était juste pour pouvoir faire un projet avec une superviseure en particulier. Mais je pense que ça, c'est peut-être quelque chose aussi qui a pu montrer mon intérêt à l'Université de Montréal parce que je voulais vraiment aller. Puis sinon, j'avais aussi une publication sur le bien-être étudiant là, que j'avais fait en première année. Pour ce qui est de mes stages à option, au début de mes 3, je m'enlignais encore plus pour la pédiatrie. Donc là, j'avais fait un stage en neuropède, un stage en pédiatrie ambulatoire. Puis là, c'est vraiment durant mes stages de psychiatrie que j'ai réalisé que ce qui m'intéressait vraiment, mais c'était plutôt l'aspect social là, de la pédiatrie. Donc, si c'est quelque chose que vous retrouvez là-dedans, si vous avez un intérêt pour travailler avec des enfants, un intérêt pour la pédiatrie sociale, moi, je suis complètement tombée en amour avec la pédopsychiatrie là, à travers mes stages. Donc, je vous conseillerais vraiment d'aller faire des stages là-dedans pour aller explorer ça. Puis en 4e année, là, j'ai choisi plus des stages en lien avec la psychiatrie. Moi, on m'avait recommandé des psychiatres en particulier, plus que des stages. J'étais enseignée auprès des résidents, auprès des staffs, puis il y en avait beaucoup qui m'avaient recommandé Dr. Traïkou, qui travaille au Douglas sur les troubles, un étage de troubles de l'humeur. Donc, j'avais fait 2 semaines avec lui. Il est super gentil. Il fait beaucoup d'enseignements, donc c'est sûr que je recommanderais un stage avec lui. Dr. Biskin, qui est le directeur de programme adjoint. Je suis comme tombée en amour avec lui. C'est comme le meilleur psychiatre que j'ai jamais rencontré. Donc, n'importe qui, je conseille définitivement un stage au Jewish avec Dr. Biskin. Puis avec Dr. Himen aussi en pédopsychiatrie, j'ai beaucoup aimé ça. Donc, ça, c'était les stages plus de psy que j'avais fait, puis j'avais plus choisi en fonction de qui faisait ces stages-là. Puis mes stages, donc j'avais fait mes 8 semaines en psy avec ça. Puis je suis venue aller chercher de la médecine de l'adolescent au Children's, qui était vraiment un super stage si vous avez un intérêt pédopsychiatrie. Puis les soins palliatifs, je les ai faits à Gatineau. Puis ça aussi, c'était vraiment le fun. Tous mes stages, je les conseille vraiment. Puis si vous avez des questions spécifiques, vous pourrez me demander éventuellement. Puis au final, pour moi, j'avais vraiment envie de retourner dans une école francophone. Donc, j'ai juste appliqué au Québec en psychiatrie. Puis j'ai appliqué en médecine de famille aussi dans les sites qui étaient francophones puis les sites communautaires. Puis j'ai un peu, la veille du CaRMS, j'ai un peu regretté d'avoir ranké médecine de famille finalement parce que la veille, je me disais vraiment que je voulais vraiment être en psychiatrie puis que je serais déçue d'être en médecine de famille. Donc, je pense que c'est quand vous faites votre choix de rank, c'est important de bien vous demander si c'est quelque chose que vous voyez vraiment faire au long terme. Qu'est-ce qui t'a attiré particulièrement de l'UDM ou juste le français? Je sais, je suis peut-être mieux de répondre à la fin, je ne sais plus j'ai combien de temps, là, mais en gros, l'UDM, moi, ce qui m'a vraiment, vraiment attiré, c'était les résidents. Quand il y avait des rencontres avec les résidents, ils avaient tout l'air de triper, c'était vraiment une belle gang, ça avait l'air vraiment le fun d'être à l'UDM, il y avait plein d'événements sociaux, puis c'est quelque chose que j'avais vraiment envie. Puis le programme en soi, honnêtement, sont similaires à travers toutes les universités du Québec, mais à l'UDM, il y a un profil pédopsychiatrie que tu peux prendre dès ta première année. Donc, c'est sûr que c'est quelque chose qui m'a intéressée, mais au final, je ne pense pas que je vais prendre ce profil-là, mais étant donné que j'avais un intérêt pour travailler avec les enfants, mais ça m'avait attiré aussi. Si tu as d'autres questions, tu pourrais me contacter sans problème. Puis vite, les tips que j'avais à donner. Moi, j'avais pris 4 semaines de congé pendant le temps des fêtes. Puis après ça, j'avais mon stage de médecine d'urgence. Puis pour de vrai, moi, ça a vraiment fait une grosse différence d'avoir autant de temps libre. Les semaines avant CaRMS, j'ai pu comme prendre vraiment mon temps pour écrire mes lettres. J'ai peut-être passé trop d'heures pour le faire parce que j'avais plein de temps libre, mais au final, ça, c'est quelque chose que j'étais vraiment contente. Puis ça fait en sorte que pendant mes stages à l'automne aussi, j'avais pas ce stress-là qu'il fallait que j'écrive mes lettres à travers mes stages parce que je savais que j'allais les faire pendant mes vacances. Pour des petits tips and tricks rapidement pour les entrevues de l'UDM qui sont un peu différentes qu'ailleurs. Il y a une entrevue de groupe qui analyse vraiment comment tu interagis avec les gens dans l'entrevue. Puis c'est comme vraiment des basic skills de communication. Fait que c'est vraiment d'avoir du fun à travers ça parce que c'est le fun d'interagir avec les gens. Là, moi, j'étais avec Samuel aussi. Fait que c'était drôle de te revoir là-dedans. Puis pour l'entrevue individuelle, mais il y avait beaucoup de questions qui demandaient des mises en situation, là, des exemples de situations que vous avez vécues. Fait que de bien préparer et de bien penser à ça, je pense que c'est sûr que ça aide. Moi, ce qui m'avait aidé aussi, c'est que j'avais contacté beaucoup de résidents des différentes universités pour vraiment voir eux, qu'est-ce qu'ils aimaient de l'université, qu'est-ce qu'ils aimaient moins, de comprendre un peu le vibe de l'université. Ça m'a aidé à me donner aussi du jus, là, du contenu pour pouvoir l'intégrer dans mes lettres de motivation, dans mes questions d'entrevue, avec des réponses qui étaient vraiment plus personnalisées, plus spécifiques, qu'on ne trouverait pas juste sur le site Internet, mettons. Fait que ça m'a aidé. Fait que pas gêné de parler aux résidents, ils sont là pour ça, puis ils sont toujours bien contents de parler à des gens qui sont intéressés. Puis finalement, moi, ce qui m'a gardé aussi avec une zone un niveau de stress qui n'était pas trop élevé, c'est de se rappeler que si on a un match, mais c'est pas la fin du monde non plus. C'est sûr que je suis une MedPi, j'ai peut-être j'ai peut-être plus je ne sais pas, en tout cas, mais dans le fond, moi, je me disais qu'au pire, si je ne matche pas, j'allais prendre une année pour voyager, pour faire une maîtrise dans quelque chose qui m'intéresse. Puis ça m'a comme vraiment, à travers tout le processus, gardé un niveau de stress qui n'était pas trop élevé. Donc, ce serait ça mes conseils.
Merci beaucoup, Sandrine. Donc, on va juste passer à une slide précédente. Mon Dieu, excusez. Voilà. OK.
Hi everyone, I'll just do mine in English. So yeah, before I jump in, I just wanted to say that last year I attended this talk and it was super helpful to me because that's where I kind of met someone who had matched to UBC, and I was able to connect with her, and during my application process, her support was super helpful. So if any of you is considering applying to UBC, please do feel free to reach out because I'd be super happy to give back in the same way I received over the past year. So in terms of my background, I'm an international student, and the reason why I put that there is because similar to out-of-province students, international students have a same kind of contract with the Quebec government, which means that after you finish residency, the government kind of decides where you're going to work for a bunch of years. And so that was part of my decision of where I chose to apply. And in Quebec, I only applied to McGill and didn't apply to the other schools because of that. So I did an undergraduate degree in Vancouver in environmental science, and then worked for a nonprofit in sustainability after that. And also of note, I did my clerkship in Gatineau. So in terms of my extracurriculars, if you just take a quick look, you'll see that there is really nothing really related to mental health or psychiatry. And why I really wanted to put that there is to emphasize that I think more than trying to choose things that you think are directly related to psych, if you're interested in applying in that, more important than that is to do things that you're really passionate about and that you're interested, because those are the things that help you grow and flourish into a full human. And this definitely shows in when you apply to a program. So for me, I'm really interested in social justice and environmental and climate justice work. So I've been involved with the equity committee throughout the 4 years of med school, and was able to do a bunch of passion projects through that. Also, another thing is that when I was in Gatineau, I started with another student a community garden in a CHSLD, and it's still being run by students. And I was able to talk about that during my interviews because it was kind of something different that they weren't I guess used to seeing on CVs. And I also spent a bunch of time throughout clerkship doing things outside of med school, and those include practicing different kinds of dances and doing a lot of running and yoga as well. In terms of research, I was involved in the publication of 3 papers, but none of them were first author, and 2 of them were related to mental health. I also had some involvement in like global health, particularly in environmental health. I also did a transcultural psych research elective. So this was a key part of my clerkship experience because I think Maddie mentioned before, like the value of mentors, and it was during that elective that I met someone whose like work really aligned with how I see myself practicing medicine in the future, and it really shaped also my interest in psychiatry. So yeah, if you get a chance to be involved with a transcultural department, transcultural psych department at McGill, I fully recommend it. That department is unique across Canada. There's no other like that. So do make the most of it if you get a chance. For electives, I did child psychiatry in Gatineau and neurology also in Gatineau. In Med 4, I applied for my electives and got none of them twice. So I got really worried about not getting psych electives. And I think part of it was because I, like Sandrine mentioned, she knew who to apply for, like who to contact, but I did my clerkship in Gatineau, so I didn't actually know that I could do that. So it was, if ever that happens to you where you apply and you don't get your electives, like just keep at it. I just kept emailing until they gave me something that was available, and I got Psych ER for 4 weeks. And I'm super grateful I did that because I got exposed to areas of psychiatry that I wouldn't have sought out myself. So, and then other things, yeah, adolescent medicine and palliative care are awesome, like other electives that can also kind of help you develop outside of psych. In adolescent medicine, you can do a lot of eating disorders. So for CaRMS, I applied to only psych. I applied to 5 schools, and then ended up ranking 4 schools for which I got interviews for. I put 8 sites next to it just to give a bit of context, that for some schools, they have more than 1 site. Like UBC has 4 sites for 1 program. For the personal statement, the approach I had was having some core parts and then some parts tailored to each program. And for the letters of reference, I asked for 3, I got 3, and from 1 core and 2 from electives, but I agree with Maddie that ask for more if you can. I wouldn't fully recommend like what I did. So for tips, I think I already covered like the electives. Just keep at it. If you don't get your psych electives, just keep emailing until they offer you whatever is available. What I found helpful too was journaling meaningful experiences during clerkship, because that helped me when I was writing my personal letters to have some stuff already fleshed out. And it also helped me when I was preparing for interviews because I had some details that I would have forgotten otherwise. For letters of reference, in person, asking in person is better than asking by email. And why I say that is because I found that by asking in person, I could tell when I made the request how the person kind of reacted a little bit and got a bit of a sense whether I should like ask someone else or that was a good idea. And if you can, go to the info sessions that will happen during the CaRMS application period. All programs in Canada are going to give you excellent education, but there are other things too to a program that you may want to know. And sometimes like the vibe of an info session gives you more kind of like that hint. Also, yeah, reach out to residents from programs of interest. They can give you insights that you won't find on the description of the programs on their website. And yeah, practicing mock interviews are very helpful because often like interview questions repeat themselves. And just to finish is that you'll see through this presentation that like psych candidates have a variety of backgrounds and interests. So really do the things that interest you, like rather than trying to tick boxes to be the perfect ideal psych candidate, because I really don't think there's an ideal psych candidate, and it's just like being able to show what you're passionate about and is given a lot more value. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you so much. I think we're on a roll in terms of timing. Thank you, guys. We're gonna go next to Athena.
Oh, hi, you can all hear me? Amazing. Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Athena. I matched to Ottawa, which I'm really excited about. So for me, the reason why I really wanted to go back to Ontario is because I'm from Ontario. So I'm at a province, which means that the longer I stay here, the more dangerously close I am to having to pay my $300K fine if I don't go to an area of need as assigned by the Quebec government. So I took my chance now to get out while I could. But at the same time, I also wanted to be able to keep practicing my French in an environment where I'd have those opportunities, because that was part of the reason I moved here in the first place from Ontario. So a bit about my background: I did a Bachelor in Neuroscience, I did a Master's in OT as well, both of which did come up during, well, maybe not so much the Bachelor in Neuroscience, but the Master's in OT did come up during my interviews as well, and also in my letters. Extracurriculars, so I really echo what Tria was saying about kind of doing things that you love and are passionate about, because that really, I think, comes through in the interview process. And that kind of genuineness, I think, is really important for yourself and also for the people that you talk to. So I really like art. So some of you may or may not recognize my name from Dr. Moore's blockchain slides. I did the illustrations with him, which was really, really fun. And it was such an amazing experience to get to contribute to med ed in that way, because med ed is another big passion of mine. I also sing sometimes, so I would perform with friends back when those were, you know, that was still an option. I drew for the McGill Tribune. I also did a lot of community service and outreach, because that's another big passion of mine. So I started Art for Elderly from my CHAP placement with one of my good friends, Caroline. And I also am really interested in neurodiversity. So I did a bit of research and also some community outreach projects for that. And then I taught neuroanatomy. I, during my master's, worked as a TA that went to like Adobe Illustrator, etc., which was really fun. And again, really just kind of, I think, aligned and just built my skills personally. I worked for the radio. I also won some awards, which were on my CV. And most importantly, I really like food. I really like food, which also came up a lot in my interviews. And I've already started making my list of ice cream places and brunch places in Ottawa. So for research, I have one first author publication actually from my undergrad, and some conference presentations from undergrad, as well as my master's in med school. But I honestly didn't do a lot of research. Like, I'm not someone who really likes to do research. So I really made a commitment to myself when I started med school that I would be very intentional about the research that I did. So I only went for things that were really interesting to me. So I ended up being involved in the Osler essay competition, where I wrote about kind of humanities and medical illustrations and how we can apply that to current med ed. And also I did an internship in public health and social policy. And I also involved in some med ed things, which actually let me go to a conference in Calgary this past weekend. So that's, for me, one of the biggest perks about doing research, to be honest. But of course, if you're passionate about it, I definitely say go for it. But even if you don't love research like me, you can definitely still find things that you enjoy, but also don't feel obligated. So for my electives, in Med 3, I did Psychiatry for 3 weeks, and then Neuro for 3 weeks. And then in Med 4, I did all of those ones that are listed there. I'm just not going to repeat them for the sake of time, but feel free to message me if there's any specific questions that anyone has about any of those electives. I did 3 psych electives in total that kind of span the lifespan. So 1 child, 1 adult, and 1 geri, which I found super helpful. So in terms of CaRMS, so I also parallel planned with neuro and family. So I applied the most broadly to psych because that was the one that I was most interested in. The ones that are bolded are the ones where I got interviews, and Calgary and Dal did not want to interview me, which at first was a little bit of a bruise to my ego. But I think also at the same time, like, I think it's really important to normalize like not getting all the interviews for all the schools that you apply for. Like, that's really normal, and it's very okay, and it should not discourage you, because it's such a long process that you do not want to be discouraged from the get-go. Obviously, like, I have friends who didn't get that many interviews for various programs and still matched to a place that they're really happy with. So I think that's that's one reason why I really want to bring that up. And another is that I think that for Calgary and Dow, they were probably the two that I was least interested in and had the least ties to geographically and just kind of in general. So I think they could kind of tell even from my letter that I wasn't as interested, and maybe they were like, well, then why would we interview you? So I think that's just to kind of drive home that point about being genuine, I think is really important. Like Calgary, literally, even though I went this past, like I think it would have been different had I gone on my trip before CaRMS applications, but like I literally was like, I like mountains. So like they were like, no. So yeah, so for so I got 15 interviews out of 17 programs I applied to. This is across psych, fam ed, and neuro. So personal statements, I started really early because I like to just like feel like I've started things. So I actually like I started making Word documents and like saving them, and you know, like McGill psych letter draft in the summer, but I actually didn't really sit down and write until much too close to. I think I really just kind of hammered everything out in the last 2 weeks before the deadline, and it was very stressful because I was also on like rotation. I got sick. It wasn't technically COVID, but I'm pretty sure it was. Like it was bad. So I personally recommend taking a couple of weeks off before the CaRMS deadline. That's what I would personally do if I could go back. But it's all like obviously it's totally up to everyone's like personal style and how they work. And then I discussed with friends, which I found really helpful. Just kind of had to have a sounding board. And asked like friends who were not in med, who were in med, who were residents in psych, but also other specialties too, just to review, which I found really, really helpful and obviously very kind of everyone. And also for letters of reference, so similarly to Tria and not similarly to Madi, I had only 3. I honestly didn't even think I needed more. Like I didn't even like contemplate the thinking that, oh, maybe I should get an extra, just because I could barely get 3. Just because I was triple planning, like it was hard to get 9 letters total. So like when I got 3, I was like very happy with that. So I personally don't see it as an issue. Like I don't think you have to push yourself or stress about getting more than 3, because that really wasn't even something that crossed my mind. But obviously, you know, the more the better that you can choose. But yeah, 1 was from my core. Actually, they weren't even all from my electives even. So like no stress. And it wasn't even from like, it was like from like a core outpatient psychiatrist I worked with for like a day. Like it wasn't even from my inpatient. So all that to say, like, don't stress. So yeah, so tips, these are pretty general tips just for CaRMS and clerkship in general, but I'm really happy to speak about anything more personally if you email me or Facebook me. So I think one of the things is just to do other things. Like CaRMS is really intense, especially psych interviews sometimes last all day and it's exhausting. And like, I would just like, on weekends, I would go out for walks, I would see my friends, I would watch a lot of television when I wasn't interviewing. Like those are all okay. Like do whatever it is that keeps you well. I wrote manner pets are allowed, okay, and normal. So I think like I actually really didn't like psych when I first started my core, because I started on inpatient and I just like happened to have a preceptor who was like a great person, but just not the best preceptor. And I was like so disappointed because I was really looking forward to loving psych, and I didn't for the first 3 weeks I was doing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't get a letter. I don't even like this. And obviously spiraled a lot. But eventually I found my way back to psych. So all this to say, like, it's okay if you know, you're not like all in on psych and 100% all the time. Like you're okay to doubt it and then to question it. And then actually I found that made me stronger in terms of like my conviction to go into psych afterwards. If you feel awful after interviews, don't stress about it being you. And you will feel awful after interviews, but it really isn't you. It's just part of this horrible process. And just to be kind to yourself. I think just being self-compassionate and reminding yourself and reminding your friends of that too, and having them remind you. I think that was something that really helped get me through, again, this truly awful process that I do not wish on anyone, but unfortunately you will probably all go through unless you decide not to do CaRMS, and that's okay too. So it's easy to stress with the little things. For example, like one of my electives, I wasn't able to get a letter, and I was like, okay, like this is done. But again, like it worked out. Obviously, I still matched and everything. So like I think we tend to think that every little thing matters, but usually things work out for better, like for the better, I would say. But it's hard to keep that perspective when you're in it. So just again, try to be kind to yourself even when it's not easy. And yeah, just my parting words. And sorry, I feel like I've taken up too much time, Sam. But believe in yourself. Oh, okay. Fantastic. So believe in yourself and be true to yourself are my final words, not only during CaRMS, because like I was saying, I think in the interviews, in your letters, it's really important to show that genuine interest and that genuine honestly, integrity to yourself. But even in clerkship too, like I had some really adverse experiences during clerkship, as I unfortunately I'm sure many of you have or like will have. But I think it's important to just stand your ground. Even like, for example, one of the electives where I didn't get a letter, like, anyways, I'm not going to get into it too much, but basically like it was like I wouldn't have gone back and done anything differently. I wouldn't have changed how I acted to get a letter or anything. Like, I think that everything that I did was exactly what was true to myself and true to my patients. And I think that just keep your integrity and your genuineness. I hope that's the word for it, about yourself throughout clerkship as well as through CaRMS, because I think that's like no matter what the outcome is, you'll always be able to fall back on that and know that you did right by yourself and by your patients. So yeah, that came off a little more preachy than I wanted to, but I hope that was helpful.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Athena. We're gonna go next. Next is me. Donc, ma slide de PowerPoint est en anglais, mais je vais juste parler en français. Donc, moi, j'ai matché à McGill, très content. Donc, je vais parler très, très brièvement de mon background. Mon background est en philosophie. J'ai fait un PhD là-dedans. Donc, je présume que ça ne va pas parler à comme personne parmi vous, là, mais s'il y a quelqu'un qui a fait un PhD in the humanities, si vous voulez, contactez-moi, puis on parlera davantage. On se fait un groupe Facebook à 2 membres, mais je vais aller plus directement dans les tips, parce que quand j'ai assisté à la présentation, le post-match talk l'an passé, j'étais vraiment curieux sur tous des tips, donc je ne vais pas vous embêter avec comme les spécificités là, de comme mon background en philosophie. Mais je noterai néanmoins que ça a probablement eu un très gros impact sur comment est-ce que les gens ont vu ma candidature. Donc, c'est à prendre avec un grain de sel. Donc, c'est ça. Le reste de la slide, vous pourrez la lire là, si vous voulez. Je pense que je vais aller directement aux tips là, parce que je pense que c'est vraiment ça le yield. Donc, je dirais sans ordre particulier, puis évidemment, c'est juste des tips, ce n'est pas une formule qui marche à tout coup, ou ce n'est même pas une formule que vous avez besoin de suivre nécessairement. Mais ce que je dirais, c'est que en termes, pour commencer sur les lettres de recommandation, là, moi, personnellement, j'ai juste obtenu 3 lettres. J'ai eu genre 3 rotations en psychiatrie, incluant le core rotation. Donc, ça aurait été difficile pour moi d'aller en chercher plus. Mais si vous avez l'opportunité, pourquoi pas? Si vous voulez demander une lettre de référence, idéalement, faites-le de vive voix plutôt que par email. Ça va être mieux reçu. Puis, le fait de le demander directement va vous permettre de gager un peu la réponse du superviseur devant vous, comme vous devriez probablement jamais prendre une lettre de référence de quelqu'un qui vous dit « Ah oui, bien sûr, je peux vous en écrire une », mais qui a l'air vraiment hésitant. À moins que vous soyez vraiment pris, essayez de prendre juste des lettres de personnes qui sont vraiment enthousiastes là, de vous offrir une lettre. C'est plus facile de jauger ça quand vous leur parlez directement. Lettre de recommandation, la plupart du temps, les staffs vont vous dire « Oui, je vais t'écrire une lettre. Envoie-moi un courriel quand ça va être la période du CaRMS, puis je vais t'écrire une lettre. » Parfois, il peut y avoir un gros écart de temps entre le moment où vous avez fait votre rotation et le moment où le superviseur écrit la lettre. Donc, ça peut être utile dans le courriel, où est-ce que vous dites c'est l'heure du CaRMS, c'est l'heure de la lettre. Ça peut être pertinent de leur envoyer des reminders, des trucs que vous trouvez qui ont été vraiment cool durant votre rotation, que vous trouvez bien humblement, qui vous ont démarqué, qui vont pouvoir les aider à eux écrire la lettre. Parce que des étudiants en médecine, ils envoient genre à la pelletée. Honnêtement, ça se peut qu'ils vous aiment vraiment beaucoup. Puis ça se peut qu'ils se souviennent de vous, mais comme dans le détail, ça peut être difficile. Donc, envoyez-leur des comme reminders sur qu'est-ce qu'ils pourraient inclure dans la lettre de référence. Puis à cet effet-là, ça peut valoir la peine, à la fin d'une rotation, juste pour vous-même, écrire les choses que vous trouvez qui ont été vraiment pertinentes. Je me rappelle quand j'ai écrit à un de mes superviseurs pour dire « Vous voulez toujours m'écrire une lettre? » Je me demandais, genre, voyons, non, qu'est-ce que j'ai fait dans cette rotation-là il y a comme 1 an et demi. Donc, c'est ça. Pour la lettre d'intention, je recommande fortement de l'écrire tôt. Si vous êtes comme vraiment dans le rush, en tout cas, il y a comme tout le monde a son style d'écriture, mais moi, personnellement, je pense que ça vaut vraiment la peine de l'écrire tôt, le plus tôt possible, y compris durant les vacances d'été ou un truc comme ça, parce que ça va vous permettre de juste le reviser puis demander à plusieurs personnes d'y jeter un coup d'œil. Puis, si vous demandez à des gens de relire votre lettre, demandez aux personnes les plus méchantes que vous connaissez. Là, comme, allez pas voir un ami qui va juste vous dire que c'est comme parfait comme lettre. Ça vous servira pas. Vous voulez vraiment les commentaires qui vont vous aller peaufiner la lettre, à moins que vous ayez besoin d'une patte dans le dos, ce qui est tout à fait correct. Prochain point, donc, on est à l'ère du Zoom, du CaRMS. On n'a plus besoin de partir en avion là, pour aller dans différentes entrevues. Si c'est maintenu comme ça, là, avec que les entrevues vont toujours être en virtuel, je vous conseille de prendre avantage de ça, appliquer au plus d'endroits possible en psychiatrie. Puis, à la limite, vous avez comme un moment où est-ce que vous pouvez vous familiariser avec les entrevues si d'aventure, l'endroit auquel vous avez appliqué vous inspire un peu moins. Donc c'est ça. Un petit conseil quand j'appliquais pour psychiatrie, un conseil qui revenait tout le temps, c'était « Sam, just be yourself ». Et honnêtement, j'haïssais tellement ce conseil-là. Pour moi, ça sonnait « You, Samuel, be myself. You know, I was admitted, so just be me. That's what I mean by be yourself. » Donc, si je vous dis « be yourself », in a way, oui, soyez authentique, parce que si vous êtes plus authentique dans les entrevues, les gens vont remarquer que vous êtes plus enthousiaste plutôt que si vous essayez de faker une personnalité. Mais dans toute votre expérience, prenez le temps de sélectionner les choses spécifiques de votre vécu que vous voulez vraiment, qui soient présentées. Moi, mon background est en philosophie, puis je me disais, il faut qu'à chaque entrevue, ce soit un des trucs que je mette de l'avant. In a way, oui, j'étais myself by presenting that, mais j'ai quand même sélectionné dans une forme narrative qu'est-ce qui était important pour moi, puis qu'est-ce qui me définissait, si vous voulez. Donc, voilà, les programmes cherchent à savoir si vous êtes agréable à travailler avec, ça vous le savez. La plupart des entrevues que j'ai eues, les questions étaient de la forme. Parlez-moi d'une fois où vous avez eu un conflit. Parlez-moi d'une fois où vous avez eu telle ou telle affaire. Donc, préparez vos CaRMS roles, stories. Là, ils vont venir for sure. Double check your docs avant de les soumettre au CaRMS. Définitivement, allez voir Elisabeth. Si vous pouvez, là, du Well Office, elle va vous aider vraiment beaucoup. Puis, finalement, pour les rotations, essayez de... Vous êtes dans un réseau. Quand vous appliquez à une rotation, essayez de demander autour de vous comment est-ce que ça s'est passé pour les autres, c'est quoi la vibe. Puis, juste pour avoir une bonne idée de si c'est vraiment l'endroit où vous voulez aller. Si d'aventure, il y a peu de rotations en psychiatrie qui sont disponibles, comme c'était notre cas, faites juste envoyer des courriels non-stop. Soyez polis, comme il y a toujours un ou une secrétaire qui reçoit vos courriels. Donc, soyez pas agressif avec les gens, ça paraît extrêmement mal, mais comme be relentless si vous devez obtenir une rotation en 5. C'est pas mal ça. Si vous avez plus de questions, là, mon courriel est juste en dessous. Ça va me faire plaisir là, de vous répondre. Also, genre, le McPig va bientôt recruter, donc appliquez tous et toutes. That's it. On va passer directement à la slide suivante.
Salut. Donc, un autre speech en français pour vous. Moi, je suis aussi une MedPi comme Sandrine. Je viens de la Rive-Sud de Montréal. J'ai fait mon cégep à Édouard-Montpetit. Les extracurriculaires, c'était surtout avant Med, un peu pendant Med, là, mais en tout cas, avant, j'ai eu beaucoup de jobs étudiantes, puis j'ai fait beaucoup de bénévolat avec des enfants TSA, puis des adultes DI. Ma mère et ma soeur sont psychoèdes, fait que c'est surtout de là que part mon intérêt vers la santé mentale. Sinon, plus tard, là, Med 1, Med 2, un peu Med 3, j'ai fait aussi le groupe Osmose, là, qui, dans le fond, faisait la promotion de la santé mentale dans les écoles secondaires. Sinon, pas vraiment psy-related, mais j'ai fait partie du groupe de Wilderness Medicine de Med 1 à Med 4. Puis ça, dans le fond, c'est juste parce que j'avais vraiment, j'ai beaucoup d'intérêt vers le plein air, puis la rando, le camping. Fait que ça, c'est vraiment là-dessus vraiment que j'ai misé là, pendant toutes mes années de med sur le wellness, puis sur prendre soin de moi. Puis, je vais le redire plus tard, mais de ne pas faire des choses parce que tu te sens obligé ou de juste pour comme rajouter sur ton CV. Comme, oui, il y avait des choses qui m'intéressaient. J'ai fait un projet de recherche plus FAMED, OB-related parce que c'est un de mes autres intérêts. Mais c'était pas tant quelque chose qui m'intéressait dans la vie, la recherche. Fait que, j'ai pas poussé plus à en faire. Puis j'ai plus consacré mon temps vers le wellness. Sinon, dans mes électives, j'ai fait 3 semaines en pédopsie au Douglas avec Dr. Deleva. Puis je recommande vraiment ce stage-là. Là. C'est vraiment là que je suis tombée en amour avec la psy. Pas nécessairement pour la pédopsie, mais juste parce que j'étais comme vraiment en one-on-one avec elle. Je faisais beaucoup d'entrevues par moi-même. Fait que c'était vraiment varié, puis c'était full intéressant. J'ai full appris. En fait, c'est un stage que j'ai fait avant mon cours rotation de psy, fait que je ne savais rien du tout sur les notions psychiatriques, mais j'ai full appris, puis c'était vraiment le fun. Puis sinon, j'ai fait un stage de 4 semaines en short-term dynamic psychothérapie avec Dr. Saïd, qui est assez spécial et excentrique, vous direz. Mais c'est vraiment intéressant, là, puis j'ai vraiment beaucoup, beaucoup appris. Puis c'est assez déstabilisant comme stage. Mais ce qui est le fun, dans le fond, ce qui revient un peu de mes 2 stages, c'est que, dans le fond, j'ai été longtemps, soit 3 semaines ou 4 semaines, avec le même patron. Fait que, tu sais, ça a vraiment fait en sorte que j'ai pu comme bâtir une relation avec le patron. Puis, en tout cas, j'imagine qu'ils m'ont écrit des bonnes lettres. Fait que ça, c'est le fun. Puis, tu sais, ça a été aussi des mentors pour moi, puis de savoir qu'est-ce que j'aime moins d'un psychiatre, puis de pouvoir les appliquer plus tard là, dans ma carrière. Puis sinon, c'est ça, comme je vous disais, j'avais beaucoup d'intérêt aussi vers l'obstétrique de la FAMED. Fait que j'ai fait des stages en Gyne-Young puis en OB. Sinon, j'ai fait des stages de neuro puis des stages de FAMED. C'est ça, à CaRMS, j'ai appliqué au cadre d'Uni Franco pour psy. J'ai appliqué en FAMED aussi. Puis c'est ça, tu sais, je pense que j'aurais été bien heureuse aussi d'être prise en FAMED parce que je pense qu'on peut bien appliquer là, la santé mentale en FAMED. Mais mon premier choix, c'est sûr que c'était la psychiatrie. Puis c'est ça, encore une fois, tu sais, commencez à écrire vos lettres de motivation le plus tôt possible, quitte à en faire un petit peu au fur et à mesure, parce que vraiment, dès qu'on commence à avoir des stages et tout, le temps manque, puis c'est quand même drainant là, comme processus, là, fait que c'est le fun de commencer plus tôt. Moi, ce que j'ai fait, c'est que j'ai commencé à écrire celle pour mon programme que je voulais le plus. Puis après ça, j'ai comme fait des copier-coller, puis j'ai rajouté des petits trucs pour chaque programme. Se faire des listes de deadlines avec des amis, ça m'a vraiment sauvée parce que CaRMS, c'est comme on se fait sacrer dans ce processus-là, puis il n'y a personne qui nous dit quoi faire, puis c'est comme arrangez-vous. Fait que, tu sais, se faire des listes de deadlines, puis, tu sais, se faire des rappels entre amis, ça, c'est vraiment le fun. Sinon, moi, j'ai consulté plutôt Sophie Yolène, qui est aussi une autre, elle fait aussi partie du Wellness Office. Puis elle est plus avec Gatineau, mais elle peut aider aussi là, les gens de Montréal. Puis elle est francophone, puis elle est vraiment, vraiment gentille, là. On a écrit mes lettres ensemble quasiment, on les a passées dans, euh, dans les correcteurs, puis tout ça. Fait que ça m'a vraiment aidé. Puis demander un peu comme Sam disait, de ne pas demander à des amis qui vont te flatter dans le sens du poil, là, de vraiment demander à des gens qui vont te dire des vrais commentaires pour améliorer tes lettres. C'est ça, suivre ses feelings, être naturel, avoir du fun en entrevue, mettre des vêtements confortables, vraiment faire en sorte que vous soyez le plus vous-même possible, puis vraiment avoir du fun. Là. Les gens, ce qu'ils recherchent, c'est un futur collègue, une future personne avec qui ils vont travailler. Fait que, soyez vous-même, puis ayez du plaisir, puis faites pas des choses par obligation. Voilà.
Merci énormément, Jenny. On va passer, je pense, à notre dernière présentation, puis on aura une période de questions juste après.
So hey everybody, I'm Adam. I'll do mine in English. I know it says Athena Co at the bottom of my thing. I think it's because I copy pasted to get the format and forgot, so I'll change my email afterwards. But I probably won't touch on everything that's on my slide. I think there's a lot of information there. You can obviously go look it up on your own time. I'll try to speak a little bit more generally. As the last presenter, I'm glad to have seen so many other presentations beforehand that just showed the diversity of applicants to psychiatry. So I think if that's something you're thinking about, whether you have to do everything in psych or whether you have the experiences or not, I think this whole talk today has shown that there are just so many routes and avenues that you can use to get there. And not to harp on the same point, but it's so much more about the things that keep you interested, passionate, authentic, and doing things that you really enjoy, that really make you shine throughout the CaRMS application process and make you feel so much more comfortable with yourself. So I'll definitely emphasize that. But with that said, I am someone who, prior to med school, I started my true dream job was to be on SNL, Saturday Night Live. And when I humbled myself and when my community humbled me, I thought, okay, maybe I can go and become a counselor or a therapist. So I did want to be in the field of mental health before medical school. And then I think that carried all the way through. I did progress much more deeply into the sciences and then eventually ended up in med school, but ultimately always knew that I wanted to be in mental health. I was born in Montreal, but I did live 2 years in Vancouver where I completed my master's degree. I did my master's in kinesiology, so not super related to psych directly, but I did do research in mental health in that master. So despite not doing things that were directly psych related all of the time, there was always a way for me to relate it or make it, in some ways relatable to psychiatry. My extracurriculars, I think something to highlight is everyone has done a lot of really diverse things, and I definitely don't think diversity hurts. I think it's great to have lots of interests and to put yourself in lots of different areas. For me, I did like MSS work and was in the VP wellness role, worked with Sandrine on the MSW, I did some teaching activities, but then like Janie, I did lots of personal wellness things as well, like really big into basketball and always made sure that I had a team to play on. Spent lots of time with my family, playing board games and my partner. And then I'm very lucky because one of my big extracurriculars was that I lived in a co-op, which is like kind of an alternative form of housing, but like when I lived in a co-op in Vancouver, it gave me a lot of opportunity to do a lot of like volunteering and community work, and connected me with like a detox center that I was able to volunteer at. And I found like for my extracurriculars, I didn't go out and seek a million different things. I just kind of like one thing kind of led to the next, and opportunities presented themselves kind of naturally. I did some research in my master's. I'd say like research isn't my primary interest, but definitely if you're going to do it, make sure it's something that like you're interested in exploring, something that gets you excited and motivated. And I think the skills that you learn in research are just generally very useful skills. I think like you can be more involved on the project management side of things, but it certainly stimulates like your creativity and getting at least some basics in statistics, and writing papers is like helpful not just for research, but the other CaRM, like the CanMed roles like advocacy or scholarship or whatever else. So I found it useful, but spent more of my time in my master's doing it than actually doing it during med, more kind of finalizing things in med school. In terms of electives, I took the approach of like I enjoyed doing fewer electives, but spending more time in each of the electives that I did. And I also did make them somewhat related to psych. So I found like my developmental peds elective was great because it introduces you to a lot of child psych subjects. In Med 3, I did a psych elective prior to my core rotation. That was fine. I didn't found that hindered me in the slightest. Like Sandrine, I did it with Dr. Biskin. He's incredible mentor, so highly recommended. And I did it for 3 weeks. I found like doing an elective for at least 3 weeks was just helpful in giving me time to get to know my space. Like the first week is always like a transition and you're adapting, but then you kind of like get you kind of like get into it more. And by week 3, I found I was really like proficient, and then I did 4 weeks of family medicine, just exposing me to community settings, which I was interested in working in. And then I did, so in terms of my psych electives, I did JGH inpatient, and I did the general. On the inpatient, it was great because it just exposes you really generally. You do like, you could do ECT, you get a chance to see DBT, like therapy sessions. You're working with patients for a longer period of time, which is great. And then in my 4th year, I did a combined half-half elective. You have to do it for 4 weeks, but you do the mornings on the addictions ward with Dr. Fraser, which was awesome. And I have a personal interest in doing addiction psychiatry, so that was a really, really great one for me. But then you do the afternoons as in the outpatient setting in the sexual identity clinic, which was also a really, really great opportunity because you focus more on the perhaps psychotherapeutic elements of psychiatry and without necessarily having to do a psychotherapy elective directly. And then neuro was good, learning about the organ that we'll be looking at in psych as well. So that was good. In terms of the CaRMS process, I applied broadly. I regretted not applying to the French schools, to be honest. I think I was initially insecure with my level of French, but ultimately I think I could have applied and it would have benefited me because for me, location played such a big role. All of the programs are going to be good, but for me, I really realized I wanted to stay in Montreal and thought maybe I should have applied to the French programs as well. So don't let limitations in French hold you back from applying. In terms of the personal statement, I think it really just depends on like the way you know yourself to work. I started fairly late in the game. I started in December, but I did have 3 weeks of vacation time to like commit to working on those personal statements. So to me, I organized it so I could do it more later in the game. Getting help from like my dad, my friends. I got one resident in family medicine who looked it over. That was like super, super helpful. It just gave me a different perspective but continued to humble me. And I wrote the personal statement in the form of kind of like my story. So like where I came from, my background, where I am at now, what med school looked like for me, and then ultimately like where I want to go and how whatever program was going to kind of lead me there. Reference letters, I echo the same point that everybody else made. I I got 3 references for psychiatry, but wish I got a couple more. I felt like if I just had one additional reference, it just would have taken off some of that cognitive burden that I placed on myself in worrying about getting reference letters. So I think, and it never hurts to ask, but I agree with like the points that Sam made. Do it in person, get it from someone you felt really comfortable with, someone you got to know who perhaps was more of a mentor towards you, and then follow up with emails that like highlight some of your points. Maybe you send them your CV and just keep up to date on keeping them involved. My tips very quickly. I've talked mainly about my tips anyways throughout the presentation, so I think you've mainly heard all of them. But balance, like don't let CaRMS consume you. It's going to regardless, so if it is going to, try to spend extra effort investing in the other things. I'll echo that cliche point about being yourself. That's just, so important. But I guess the one unique way I'll talk about that is I really felt I had to do that in all of clerkship. So it wasn't just for my CaRMS, but I found it was for each core rotation, each selective and elective that I chose to do. It was always about just like trying to be genuine, trying to be myself, but also being serviceable, and not serviceable in like a gunning kind of way, but being serviceable in a way where like felt like I just tried to like do each like take care of each of my patients in a way that was like really holistic and just trying to be involved in like all aspects of care. And for me, it was totally quality over quantity. I rarely was the one who took on the most patients on my rotations. I more often than not just like tried to do my best on each case that I did, and I found that really paid off in like my dean's letter comments and like the feedback that I got from the individuals that I worked with. For the interviews, I agree with Maddie's point. Work with another person. That was so helpful for me, just like having a debrief session, even if it wasn't like going over questions related to the interview. Don't worry, I know I'm going a little over, Sam. I'll be done in like 2 seconds. I just found like debriefing, if I had an interview and then just finishing and being like, yeah, this part sucked or this part was really good, and like talking it through. Yes, I did practice for interviews, but I found after a while the interviews themselves are practice, and you kind of fall into a patterned way of doing things, and I didn't like that. I felt that the interviews where I was a little bit more improvisational, it was riskier perhaps, and I felt more vulnerable and exposed, but I also think it was much more authentic, and I think that came through in the interviews. I'll just finish by saying that like extenuating stressors and circumstances happen during the CaRMS process. For me, it happened during my interview period, and I know that it happens for lots of people at various stages of the thing. So I really emphasize like make sure you have your support systems in place, like whatever you think is best for you to cope. I would say take time to think about what your coping strategies are, and just have those in the back in your toolbox so that if for whatever reason you need it, you can utilize those. And I did change the email address in the presentation, so if ever you guys have any additional questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to talk about the process in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. So I'm just gonna stop sharing. Amazing. Donc, on a essentiellement encore un peu de temps. J'ai demandé aux présentateurs, présentatrices s'ils sont partants de prendre comme une petite période de questions-réponses, si vous en avez. Donc, c'est ça, sentez-vous libre, si vous avez des questions qui vous trottent dans la tête, qu'on n'a pas répondu au travers des présentations, vous pouvez soit lever la main ou l'écrire directement dans le chat. Ça va nous faire plaisir. Sandrine, tu as déjà une question?
Je n'ai pas une question, mais j'ai oublié de mentionner un truc qui a été vraiment highlight pour moi, que quand je demandais mes lettres de recommandation, je leur donnais tout le temps la date limite de traduction des lettres, parce que je voulais faire traduire mes lettres, mais même à ceux que je savais que je n'avais pas les utiliser en français, je donnais la date qui était comme le 5 janvier. Fait que là, je savais que c'était ça me donnait un jeu que s'il me donnait le 5, ben, les lettres, la soumission des lettres, c'est jusqu'au 30. Fait que vous regarderez les lettres, les deadlines, là, mais moi, ça m'a assuré d'avoir toutes mes lettres comme un mois d'avance.
Oriel?
Yes, thank you everyone for your presentation. It was really interesting. Ma question est pour Sandrine. Je voulais savoir, puisque tu viens de McGill, comment est-ce que tu trouvais que pour être prise à Montréal, à l'Université de Montréal, est-ce que tu trouvais que tu étais comme un peu désavantagée versus leurs candidats qui proviennent de cette université-là? Comment tu trouves que tu as pu te démarquer contre des gens qui viennent déjà de cette université-là, dans le fond?
Ben, c'est sûr que c'est vraiment dur à dire là, parce que c'est comme, au final, je ne sais pas qu'est-ce qui a fait pencher leur décision. Je sais que là, sur les 17 résidents, il y en a 12 de l'UDM. Fait qu'ils ont quand même une certaine tendance à garder leurs résidents. Qu'est-ce qui me. Ben, en fait, je sais que l'UDM, de façon générale, sont connus pour se baser beaucoup sur les MSPR, là, sur les commentaires de stage pour faire leur choix de candidat. Mais sinon, je pense que c'est vraiment juste à l'entrevue. J'avais rien fait, j'avais pas contacté les directeurs de programme ou j'avais pas essayé de faire du network à l'UDM pour avoir des meilleures chances. J'avais juste vraiment suivi le processus habituel. Puis de ce que j'avais compris aussi des autres candidats, moi, je suis la seule qui avait mis UDM en premier. Là, fait que je pense que si les autres ne sont pas à l'UDM, c'est pas parce qu'ils n'ont pas été pris, c'était juste pas leur préférence. D'après moi, si tu es une bonne candidate et que tu démontres un intérêt dans ta lettre, dans tes entrevues, mais c'est comme pas mal tout ce que tu peux faire, là, à part parler un peu aux résidents pour connaître le programme. Oui, je pense que ben, c'est sûr que j'avais aussi dans mes activités extracurriculaires, j'avais démontré un certain intérêt aussi à l'UDM. J'avais fait des collaborations avec des étudiants à l'UDM, j'avais fait le programme de recherche à l'UDM aussi. Fait que, si tu veux comme tenter ça, ben, moi, ça semble avoir marché, mais c'était peut-être pas nécessaire non plus pour que ça marche. Là. Je sais pas si ça répond bien à ta question. Là.
Oui, ça répond très bien, merci. J'aurais juste peut-être une autre question, là, c'est pour tout le monde. C'est quoi, selon vous, là, les caractéristiques d'un bon externe en psychiatrie? Tout le monde peut répondre. Là.
J'ai brisé la glace. Là. Les bonnes caractéristiques d'un externe sont probablement les mêmes bonnes caractéristiques que dans n'importe quelle autre rotation. Prends genre vraiment ownership du soin du patient. Montre-toi utile si tu peux. C'est correct de faire des erreurs durant ta rotation. Ce qui est vraiment pas correct, c'est par exemple de mentir. C'est correct d'oublier de checker les vitals. C'est vraiment grave de inventer des vitals parce que tu as oublié. Je vais laisser les autres ajouter à ce que je viens de dire.
Je pense de démontrer un intérêt peu importe dans quel stage tu es, parce qu'au final, quand ils regardent ta candidature, ils ne regardent pas juste les commentaires de la spécialité dans laquelle tu appliques. Même si tu n'es pas experte en chirurgie générale, là, moi, je m'évanouis en salle d'op. Clairement, comme je n'étais pas une scène, mais juste de montrer un intérêt, de montrer que tu es là pour travailler, ça te permet d'avoir des bons commentaires comme le plus possible dans les stages. Mais comme Samedi aussi, c'est correct de faire des erreurs. Puis c'est pas un commentaire de stage qui est un peu moins bon qui va faire en sorte que tu ne rentreras pas dans ton programme de choix. Là.
Oui.
Ah ouais, bah déjà, merci pour la présentation, c'était vraiment informatif. Et donc, ma question, c'est quoi les meilleures ressources ou qu'est-ce que vous conseillez de lire ou peu importe, comme se documenter pour se préparer le mieux pour les rotations en psychiatrie?
I can start by answering. It's okay if I answer in English.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I found like you know, for most rotations, I didn't always like read the textbook or whatever, but I found for psych, I just found a textbook that works for me, and I actually did read the majority of it, not in full. So I did a one of my electives in psychiatry before my core rotation, and for that elective, I didn't have time to read a book or whatever, so I did online med ed for the psych section, and I found it gave like a good rudimentary like basics to get by in psych, no question about it. So online med ed was very good. And then I did read case files, and I found case files good because you get cases, and you know, you get the kind of bread and butter cases with, you know, clinical patterns, and you kind of get those generic profiles. And of course, it doesn't look exactly like your patients, but if a staff asks you a question, generally it helped me have a decent answer. And I found like, I found those were like just, yeah, investing a little bit more time. If psych was really something that I was keen about, and it was for me, I invested that time for that subject. Whereas, for example, surgery, I didn't read a single textbook or anything. So yeah, that was it for me.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And I just posted it in the chat, psychotropics in a nutshell. Ah non, la question est en français. Mais c'était vraiment high yield là, pour tout ce qui est plus du par cœur en psy, c'est vraiment plus la pharmaco. Là, le reste, c'est un peu comme de l'instinct. Là. Fait que c'était vraiment comme toutes les high yield quand je me faisais. C'est rare que je me faisais PIM, mais quand je me faisais PIM, c'était tout était là-dedans.
Ok, c'est bon, merci beaucoup.
Est-ce que quelqu'un a une autre question? Does anyone has another question? Je vais donner quelques secondes.
Can I just say congratulations to everyone? I'm really excited that we're all going into a field we love so much, and no biases here, but it is the best field.
True. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can always email us, any of the presenters. And if you feel like there was something that could have been done better regarding the post-match talk in general, please reach out the McGill Psychiatry Interest Group, the McPig. We would really like to have your comments. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for coming, and merci énormément là, à nos présentateurs, présentatrices, super appréciés, vous êtes les best. OK, salut tout le monde.
Bye.